This morning for today's message, we're going to be spending a lot of time in the first half of the parashah readings from this week, specifically Leviticus 19. And what we're going to be looking at is we're going to see how God called the children of Israel and still calls us today to be a holy people. We see actually in the parashah this week that it's actually repeated several times that God calls his people to be holy unto him. Now, before we get into these verses, I do want to fully admit that as I reflect upon my own teachings, sometimes wonder if maybe I teach too often on the holiness of God and our need to be holy like he is holy. And I wonder this sometimes in the idea of like, well, are there other aspects of Scripture that maybe I'm missing or I'm not focusing enough on that also need to be taught? In fact, last night what I decided to do is I looked across the different topics of the messages I've given over the past 3 years, and I noticed that almost every single one of my messages can be boiled down to either a call to holiness or a call to obedience. And the reality is those two are actually intertwined quite a bit. But every teaching is just a different way, a different approach to these calls of holiness and obedience. And yet, even if I might doubt occasionally whether I focus on holiness too often, or perhaps you hearing my messages, maybe you feel that I'm almost obsessively teach holiness time and time again, the reality is I've decided that this isn't going to change anytime soon with my messages. For the call to holiness and the call to obedience is truly, I would argue, the central message of all the Scriptures. And unfortunately, I think this balance is needed because too often this message, even though it's central to all the Scriptures, it's either neglected, it's missed, or it's outright ignored, especially in many Christian denominations. And I would say this because even in our redemption and even in our salvation by the blood sacrifice of Yeshua and the unmerited gift of God's mercy and favor that we have received, which is oftentimes, where the Christian messages and teachings go, the ultimate end of these things, though, the ultimate end of our redemption, the ultimate end of our salvation and what Yeshua did for us and the favor that God gives us, the ultimate end is to bring the elect, to bring those who have called out by God and to respond to it back into a state of holiness, back into a state of obedience with God. And as such, this morning, there will be yet another teaching on holiness from this bema to help us understand our need to be holy because the Master, because Elohim has commanded us to be holy. And in fact, we hear these very words uttered in Leviticus 19:1-2 and 20:26, which say,
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I the Lord your God am holy. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I the Lord am holy, and have severed you from the other people, that ye should be mine.
So it's clear here that because God is holy, or God is Kodesh, meaning that he's separate, he's set apart, he is uncommon, we also, those who follow him, those who believe we've been marked by him and belong to him, we also are to be Kodesh. In reality, why would we expect anything else? Even every Christian knows, or every Christian desires to be in the presence of God. At least they should be desiring this, and most would profess that they do desire to be in God's presence, whether that really is true or not. But if that's what we desire, if we desire to have fellowship with God, if we desire to walk with him, if we desire to be in that holy presence, it's required that we also be holy. It's required that we be like God. It requires us to separate ourselves from the world, to fundamentally change who we are, and to walk in accordance with the instructions that are given at Sinai and the example shown to us through the life and the ministry of Yeshua. But the reality is that many people don't want to change. Many people want the relationship with God. They want the benefits of a relationship with God. But at the end of the day, I don't think many people actually want to have to change who they are. They don't want to be separated from the lives that they can live in the world in accordance with the flesh. That's why many in the world reject the good news, reject the gospel message outright. But I also think it's why many Christians today reject the call to Torah obedience. We don't want to have to change. We don't want to have to be separated. And although the message of this one verse in Scripture is not intended to be fearful or to inspire fear, I truly believe one of the scariest verses to man, especially those who are unsaved, those who walk outside of God, one of the scariest verses in the entire Bible in the hearts of men is Genesis 5:24, which says,
"And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him."
Now, why would I say that's such a scary verse for many people, especially those who do not belong to God? Because what this verse suggests is that if we get too close to God, something's going to happen to us. And what happens when we get close to God? If we actually do begin to walk with Him, if we actually hear His voice, how many people out there really want this? Now, hopefully all of us here today would say, yes, this is what we want. This is what we desire. But how many people in the world, and sadly how many people that fill the churches, actually want to hear what God has to say to us? What does God have to say to me? It's likely, and we know this in our hearts, it's likely He's going to require something of us. We're going to have to change. After all, we are all made new in the image of the second Adam. So we know, especially those in the church, we know that we are expected to change, that God does change us. But how many of us really want that? How many of us really want to face the reality that we're going to be taken to a new place? And when we are changed, when we are taken to that new place, we will become not, just as Enoch. When he walked with God, he became not, it says. And we become not even as we continue to walk out in the flesh, but once we hear the call of Messiah and we respond to it, and we do become His, and we do become changed, we become not to the world. No longer should the world recognize us as being with it anymore. For once we become holy, meaning once we become separated, as God expects us to, we become a peculiar people unto Him. And as such, we should not look like the other nations of this world. Rather, we should appear as pilgrims. Or really even we should be the illegal immigrants. We should be the aliens. We should be aliens to this world. And that we should not appear at home in it. But rather, we're simply travelers. We're strangers in a foreign land to this world. Think of it, just the comfort that you have in the solitude of your own home. And probably the introverts can relate to me better than the extroverts out there. But there's something about the comfort that one has in their own home opposed to anywhere else in the world. It's the one place where you truly feel you can be yourself. Where, you don't have to worry about what you wear. You can ask my wife, Shelley, usually within 2-3 minutes after I'm home, she's always amazing, 30 seconds, I'm upstairs and I'm in pajamas or I'm in sweats or a t-shirt. And it's immediate because that's what I prefer to be in. That's the true me. I'd rather be in those comfortable clothes. And when I'm in my home, I don't have to worry about negotiating with the world or negotiating with people to make sure that I'm not offending anyone, I'm not stepping on anyone's toes, that I'm meeting other people's needs or expectations. There's that comfort of just being who I truly am in home. And the reality is, in our spiritual walks with God, we should never feel that way when we're walking out there in the world. The world's not our home anymore because we have been separated from it by the blood of Yeshua. And so, that comfort in solitude that exists, This should be something completely foreign to us, except at times such as this morning when we come together as a body of believers, as we come together as a Mikra Kodesh, and we can be our true selves, as we have been made separate by God. We can be our true selves in these instances. But as soon as, Shabbat's over, as soon as we even go out these doors and we drive down the road, again, that discomfort should automatically, we should begin to feel that discomfort pressed upon us. Now in the scriptures, we see how God separated the children of Israel from the nations. We see it first in Exodus 19, 1 through 6, which reads,
In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim, and were come out to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel.
Now these verses here give us a clear picture of how God actually goes about separating his people. First of all, the separation required them to be called out. They had to be called out of Egypt. So they were immersed in the world. Egypt was their world, and they had to be called out. But it wasn't enough just to simply to take them out of Egypt. God didn't take them out of Egypt and take them directly to the land of Canaan. Instead, he had to take them away from all the nations. And so he takes them out into a wilderness place where they won't be bothered. They won't be influenced by other people around them. Rather, that they are truly taken out of the world to some place that's separate. But the even more important thing in all of this is not only when God calls people out, not only when he separates them, is he simply removing them from their current situation, but he always takes them into something new. There's expectations that God has of those people that he calls out. With the Israelites here, we see that they were called into a new role. They were to become a kingdom of priests, meaning that they were to be the mediators between God and all the other nations. They were to be the ones who would teach Torah to the other nations, both through the example that they lived, and as people would see the better lives that they lived by living according to Torah, they'd be attracted to that way of living, to the God of Israel, and they would then seek to be taught. So Israel was called into something new. They were also obviously called, as part of being a kingdom of priests, into a covenantal relationship with God through the Torah. Now, for those of us today who are followers of Yeshua, we see that this calling out from the nations and into service to God as mediators or ambassadors between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth, it's the very same as it was for the children of Israel at Sinai. Regardless of whether we were born Jewish or we were born Gentile, all of us have been baptized into new life through Yeshua, and we've been called in that baptism to be members of a royal priesthood, one whose lives give testimony to the fact that we are now a possession of a holy God, that we no longer belong to the world, we now belong to something separate. 1 Peter 2, 1 through 10 explains this.
Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile and hypocrisies and envies and all evil speakings, as newborn babies desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. And if so be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious, ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. Wherefore also it is contained in the Scripture, Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient. whereunto also they were appointed. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy.
So, having been called out into this royal priesthood, hopefully in the words of Peter here you saw the parallel that exists there between the Israelites being called out, and that even here in Peter, we're being called out to live a Torah-observant life. Go to the first verses we just read here in 1 Peter. At the very beginning of this passage, we see a reflection of the Ten Commandments. They may not be in the same words, but if you actually stop to think about what Peter's saying here, you see this reflection of the Ten Commandments that were spoken by Adonai at Sinai. Peter says we're to lay aside malice. Well, that lines right up with thou shalt not murder, and especially Yeshua's teaching of murder also occurs in the heart just by hating others. Peter says we're to lay aside guile. Well, what do the commandments say about guile? Well, you're not supposed to bear false witness. Likewise, Peter says, lay aside the hypocrisies. Same thing, don't bear false witness. Even don't bear false witness to yourself as well. I mean, it is don't bear false witness against thy neighbor, but really you shouldn't be bearing false witness against yourself either. Peter says, lay aside your envies. Thou shalt not covet. He says, lay aside evil speakings. Thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. So we see, not every single, we can't say a perfect 10 for 10 here on the commandments that were spoken, but we see Peter's concerns and the things he says you have to set aside, you've now been separated from, are the very same things that God at Sinai was saying as the children of Israel, you are now separate from. And it's important that we recognize this connection between the call to be holy, to be set apart, and living our lives according to the commandments of God. For it is only when we pursue Torah, God's instructions, that we can truly be as he is, to be holy. And this is why it is essential that we, the disciples of Yeshua, understand that Torah still has an indispensable role in our lives. Even under grace, Torah remains important to us, because if we're truly going to be aliens in this world, if we're truly going to be separate from it while still having to live in it, though, being separate but still living among the nations, we still need that protective fence that inhibits our mixing with the sins of the nations that are out there. And what's that fence? What does this for us? Torah obedience does this. To live a life divorced from Torah is to live a life that gravely jeopardizes our standing of being holy unto God. And it jeopardizes our standing of having access to his Ruach. And ultimately, if we don't hold on to Torah, there is even a possibility that we could end up rejecting his word and ultimately leaving his Messiah and our Savior. For if we fail to walk the holy path with God as his children and as the disciples of Yeshua, we begin walking instead a common path, a path that is divorced from God's presence. For we must always remember that although God has called us to be holy, it is not by our own holiness that he does this. It's not by our own merits that we do this. Rather, it is because we carry the mantle of his holiness upon us. Now, turning back, like I said, I want to spend most of the day in the parashah. This is where we're going to turn to it for pretty much the rest of the teaching. We're going to look specifically at chapter 19 of Leviticus. And we're going to see, as Brian was sharing in the beginning, at the moment at the beginning when he was reviewing the parashah, we see here that the parashah this week outlines a series of commandments, a series of instructions. And this morning, these instructions are going to be called our steps on the path of holiness. For these are a series of commands that God gives to the Israelites through Moshe right after the first commandment that we heard, and we've already read this morning, that they are to be holy because he is holy. So, beginning of chapter 19, that verse, it says, you are to be holy because I am holy. That's the command. And then he gives a series of instructions on how you actually go about doing this. Now, before we get into the specifics of these commandments, few things in understanding about this instruction and these steps on our path. First of all, realize these are not steps on a stair. They shouldn't be thought of that way. They're not progressive, and they do not lead to a higher stage or to a higher state of being. It is a path that we walk before us straightforward, but not something that causes us to ascend. And this is important because the path is not one to holiness. It's not that you're unholy, and then if we walk out these commandments, we become holy by walking out those commandments. Rather, it's the fact that God has already made us holy. And by his work, by the unmerited grace, he has made us a holy people unto him. Now these are the steps we are to take in walking out that holiness. Finally, also understand that this is not an exclusive set of steps. We're looking at one chapter and one set of instructions. We would have to look at all 613 of the commandments, all of the instructions of Torah, to truly see the full path of holiness. We're only... mainly because of time, we're only going to focus on what was in the parashah this week. Therefore, let's just jump right in. We're just going to read verse by verse, and we're going to look at what each of these commandments are and what they tell us today. Well, we're going to look at it both ways. We're going to look at what was it instructing the children of Israel at the time of Moshe when God gave it on how to walk out their holiness, and then we'll also apply it to our lives today, and we'll see that they're still just as relevant as they were 3,400 years ago or so when God was speaking through Moshe. So first of all, let's look at Leviticus 19:3.
This is verse 3?
Verse 3.
Okay. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God.
So in this one verse, we actually hear 3 of the 10 commandments stated right in. We hear about honoring the parents, we hear about keeping the Sabbath, and we hear the declaration, I am the Lord thy God, which is the heart of the first commandment that God spoke at Sinai. And specifically, because we'll come to some of the other ones a little bit later on in some of the other commandments here in chapter 19, I want to focus on the aspect of fearing or revering or the honoring of your mother and your father. And it's important to note, even in the speaking here of the mother and the father, that the order, the sequencing, that the mother comes first before the father is important because this was a way of God showing that honoring both is equally important. Because in an ancient patriarchal society, it's automatically assumed the authority of the father is greater than the authority of the mother. But by putting the mother first in the utterance, it's actually showing, God is showing that as a child, your honor to your parents should be equal to both the mother and the father. We also note here that the fact that this commandment here to revere your mother and your father, that it is made alongside keeping the Shabbat, and also remembering that the Lord is God. And this is important because in pairing it with these other commandments, it's tying them that your reverence to God, and your reverence to God through keeping the Shabbat, and remembering that God alone is your sovereign and your master, that one way you walk this out in the flesh is you acknowledge the authorities that are above you. And there's no greater authority and more direct authority than your parents. Just as we are to honor and obey God, we are to honor and obey our parents in similar manner. Now, this commandment's important in separating us from the world and separating the Israelites because by honoring the parents, this is how stability, but even more so, the preservation of the people would occur. The preservation of God's people, and that they would remain holy, that they would remain separate from the world. That not just God, when God called them out at Sinai, but that generation after generation after generation, the children would be raised so that they would also be separate. It was the parents' responsibility to raise their children in the covenant and in the ways of God, to teach these steps of holiness to their children. And therefore, that's why it's essential that the children would always honor and revere the parents. Now, I think if we just look at the world today, we can see that this is an idea that the parents should be revered, and we could even broaden it wider to beyond just parents, but actually elders in general should be revered. This is something the world, for the most part, rejects, especially here in the United States. In the United States, just turn on television. What do we celebrate? We celebrate youth. We don't celebrate getting older. We don't celebrate the gray hairs on our head. In fact, we often try to hide the gray hairs on our head. But even just look at our culture. Think about the TV shows and the programming that you see. Children are elevated typically to either be equals and sometimes even superior to their parents. Few examples. Simpsons been on air for over 25 years. Who's the smartest character? For those who've watched The Simpsons, who's the smartest character? Lisa Simpson, the 10-year-old girl. It's not the parents. Who often solves the problems of the family? It's the children. It's not the parents. In fact, the father is usually seen as the main contributor of the problem. Those of you who may have watched the Harry Potter movies or read the books, who are the heroes? It's the children. It's not the adults. In fact, it's oftentimes in that storyline, by disobeying and disregarding the teachings of the parents, that the children solve the problems. So we see it in the culture that there is this idea that youth is where, and what's new is what's most important, and that actually somehow wisdom is embedded in the children rather than in the adults and rather than in the parents. Especially us fathers, we take a real beating in television. There used to be two models of fatherhood or husbands in television. You have the Ralph Cramdens, the stumbling idiot who always is making a fool of himself, or you have the father knows best character, the source of wisdom and guidance and instruction for the family. Really, since probably the Cosby Show, I can't think of a father in television who is seen as the wise source of wisdom for the family. It's usually you have your Ray Romanos. You have I guess I don't watch enough sitcoms to know who would be on TV now for the dads, but it's typically the bumbling idiot is how the dad is presented. It's this complete disrespect for the father and the mother and what they have to give to their children. So one way we separate ourselves is by truly continuing to revere and honor our mother and our father. Next verse 4 says the following.
Turn ye not unto idols, nor make to yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God.
So this commandment obviously deals with idolatry, and it's also one of the 10 that were spoken at Sinai. We're told here that we're not to elevate anything, not even just above, but we're not even to elevate anything to be equal with God. We're not to share our worship and our obedience with created objects, with demons, or any of the loves that might be in our heart. And we have to remember when we read this commandment that Elohim is the king over all gods and all powers. And this is throughout the scriptures, this is proclaimed. That there is an acknowledgement there are other powers, there are other authorities that do exist there, both good and demonic. But God sits above all of them, and because he does sit above all of them, he is the only one that is worthy of our worship. We're not to seek any other type of authority. Now, obviously, in the ancient times, it was very easy to see the idolatry that existed around the around the Israelites. They saw it everywhere in Egypt, where there was this worshiping of a whole pantheon of gods. When they would come out of the wilderness and go into Canaan, again, they would see an entire pantheon of different gods. Gods like Moloch and Baal and Asherah. They would be confronted with these other types of gods and powers, which, if they didn't remain separate from God, would pull their allegiance. But, today we have our own modern gods that we have to confront as well. Again, anything that really competes in our heart for our first love with God becomes an idol. And, and I think it was said even at Yeshiva this week, how do we know if something's an idol in your life? You can't give it up. Just try to give it up for a week or two. If you can't, that suggests it probably is an idol in your life. And especially, again, look out, what are the big gods? What are the big idols out there today? Primarily, it's fortune, fame, and pleasure. Everybody wants this, and nobody wants to give it up. And unfortunately, even within when we look within Christianity, we see even some teachers who try to claim, think of the prosperity teachers. They try to claim, well, this is actually the pursuit that we should be following. We should be looking after the fortune. We should be looking after the pleasures that are available to us. So we have to reject all these other loves, all these other competing things if we're to be holy unto God. Next, we come to the peace offering that God instructs here. So verses 5 through 8.
And if ye offer a sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord, ye shall offer it at your own will. It shall be eaten the same day ye offer it, and on the morrow, and if aught remain unto the third day, it shall be burnt in the fire. And if it be eaten at all on the third day, it is an abomination, it shall not be accepted. Therefore every one that eateth it shall bear his iniquity, because he hath profaned the hallowed things of the Lord. And that soul shall be cut off among his people.
So God gives the commandment of the peace offering here again. Now, he's given it in much more detail early in Leviticus, and we've covered that before here. But, just for a quick review, if you've not heard that teaching or if you don't remember it, there are 3 types of peace offerings that could be made. You could give a peace offering to give thanks to God. You could do it to fulfill a vow to God. Or it could be a free will offering, which is primarily just an expression of gratitude or appreciation, probably the better word. It's just an expression of appreciation that you have a relationship with God. But the purpose of all 3 of these peace offerings was to declare shalom between you and God. It was to declare that there was nothing standing between you and God. There was no outstanding debts that still needed to be taken care of that could cause something to sit between you and God, to separate the two of you. And we see in the commandment here, again, of the eating of the sacrifice, that's important that it be done immediately. And remember, when we go into a sacrificial meal, when the Israelites would do this in the days of the tabernacle and the temple, the idea of a sacrificial meal is that you were sitting down into fellowship with God, and you were eating the meal with God as that demonstration of fellowship and wholeness of relationship. And this, again, being why, if you were to delay in eating the sacrifice, it was an indication that something was occurring, that you were hesitating to enter into that fellowship with God. You were hesitating. There was a lack of desire for that fellowship with God for some reason. And this relates to our prayer life today. We need to think about, do we hesitate to pray to God? Do we hesitate to worship Him? And if we are, why is that so? Is it because it's taking time away from other things that we'd rather be doing? And if that's the case, what does that say about us actually there being peace between God and us? That there is nothing in between us, that there isn't something that separates us from Him. So part of being holy is this idea of a peace offering, not just in the actual sacrifices that were given in the days of the tabernacle, but even today, are we actually truly at peace with God? Because if we are at peace, that actually is the idea that we are holy with Him, that we have been separated and are with Him, not that we remain common and there's something that still stands between us and Him. The next 2 verses, 9 and 10, deal with providing for the poor, and they say the following.
And when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Now, in an agrarian society, such as Israel was at the time this command was given, this commandment was given to make sure that concern for the poor was always there and that you provided for the poor. And specifically, it's saying that once you had taken from your field or from your vineyard, once you had harvested from that you would essentially just take what you need. And that you didn't need, and that it was actually wrong to think you had to consume everything that was in the harvest there. Now, over time, the rabbis came up, in Jewish law, they came up with an actual amount you were supposed to leave, and they said 1/60th of the harvest was always to be left in the fields or in the vineyards for the poor to be able to use. But I think God was looking for a specific number. I think God was after, take what you need, but beyond that, leave for those who are disadvantaged. And this certainly is the opposite of the message we hear today from the world. In today's world, it's about you should strive essentially to make as much money as you want so that you can consume as much as you want. That you can have everything that you would ever desire or wish for. And what this commandment really gets to the heart of in separating us from that is that we need to recognize that everything in this world belongs to God first. And our right to anything, even though we've mixed our own labors into it, our right to anything only goes to the extent to which God has given us stewardship over those things. He is still ultimately is the possessor of the entire world, of all things. And therefore, yes, we must use it, and those things that God gives us stewardship over, we're to use it to care for ourselves, but we also are always to remember the poor, and we're always to take care of them. Next verse, two sets of verses then deal with the next area, which is being honest. Verses 11 through 13 says the following.
Ye shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie one to another. And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning.
And then verses 35 through 36 say,
Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in mediard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them. I am the Lord.
So being that we follow a God of truth, it's understandable why we would be required to be honest in our dealings. And this includes not stealing from others, not deceiving others, not making false witness against ourselves or others. And certainly there's this need to be honest and truthful in all of our dealings, because think of how damaged our testimony of the good news becomes if to the world we become untrustworthy. How damaging is it, just think of the events in the world, how damaging is it when a minister on television is caught in some type of lie or caught in some type of scandal where they've misappropriated funds that were maybe given for charity work, or who have lied about the lives that they live and are seen to be the hypocrites that they are. And the reality is, those who are in the world are always looking for those opportunities. They're always looking for that opportunity to discredit the Word of God. They want to find that messenger who falls. They want to see the hypocrites who are up at the bimas and the altars, because immediately they want to pounce on them to see, and they say, see, you can't claim, because you can't trust the messenger, you can't trust the message. What this is, and it is the messenger's fault that they would bring discredit to the message. But one thing we must always realize is that the validity and the veracity, the trustworthiness of Scripture is internal. It's not dependent on those who follow it or those who proclaim it. Despite those failures, the Word of God itself will always stand on its own. Likewise, besides just being honest in our dealings, likewise, we're not to swear falsely. This is why, of course, Yeshua taught, let your yes be yes and your no be no. You should simply speak your heart. Don't speak what you think others want to hear or what will give you favor with them. Be honest in your dealings. Be honest with them. I mean, the world is what teaches that it's okay to lie or fudge the truth. White lies are okay. Hey, whatever you got to do to get ahead, that's what's important. I mean, that's the message we hear from the world. We're to be separate from that. Also in this, in being honest, is do not carry the Lord's name in vain. And we've talked about what this actually means. It means you're not to attribute evil to anything that God does. And in fact, in doing that, you're encroaching on blaspheming of the Ruach, the one unforgivable sin. But it's also claiming, and this is where the honesty really comes into, you're not to claim something is from God when you know it's not, or you're uncertain that it's not. You're not to just to use his name and the authority that's behind that name for your own benefit, for your own good, or even when you're just not certain but you want to maybe encourage someone. I mean, you may be thinking, well, I'm trying to do good. I'm just trying to use his name to encourage that other person. But if you know in your heart of hearts, or simply you don't know one way or the other, you need to keep silent and don't invoke his name in such things. The next verse talks about showing compassion to the weak. Verse 14 says,
Thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord.
Now, this seems common sense. This seems like, well, just being kind and nice. You would think that you wouldn't do things like this. And so, how does this make us holy? Because, a lot of the world would actually agree with this verse right here. But actually, it's not as common as you might think. And the reason I say this is, first of all, in ancient times, we have to understand the world we exist in today and what's right, even what the world considers right and wrong. The world doesn't want to acknowledge it, but it can't escape the fact that there's 2,000 years of Christian theology, philosophy, and moral teaching that has influenced how the world thinks today. And so something like this does seem common sense to us and commonplace. But in ancient times, especially before the good news was ever proclaimed everywhere, where what was considered to be righteous or to be the right thing was simply, if you had the power, you decided what was right. There was no real moral law that existed. And so if you simply had power to execute what you saw fit, which may have been abusing the deaf or abusing the blind, that would have been morally right. But what about modern times? Actually, modern times, just within the last 100 years, I can point to examples where we can see that the world has still mocked the weak and actually has abused and even sought to destroy and kill the weak. Go back 100 years before Hitler, and the world actually saw how ugly it was to believe in things. There were many people, even the progressives, the ones that today are considered the liberal and the most understanding and the most caring. It was the progressives who most embraced social Darwinism and eugenics. They were the ones who followed it. It wasn't again until they saw Hitler's pursuit of the master race and how ugly it was to abuse the weak and the disabled that people began to finally back off on it. Look into the history of abortion and the advocacy of abortion in the United States. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, if you actually go back to her writings, which were promoting abortion, and these have only come out recently because Planned Parenthood held the copyrights and they knew what it said, and so they hid it away from the world because they didn't want to know what their founder had to say about other people. But the copyrights are now expiring, the 75 years have passed, and so things are coming to light. Margaret Sanger, in her arguments for abortion, she wrote about this was a way to eliminate the handicapped. This was a way for those who have shown that they're entrapped in poverty generation after generation. This is a way of eliminating them. She even talks about this was a way of cleansing the lesser races of the world. I mean, this is very real. This is very modern. The idea of not of showing no compassion to the weak, it still exists. Even today, I'm beating up on the progressives right now. I can flip it on the other side. Look at those who advocate extreme patriotism in the United States or other countries. Somehow, there is an idea that some believe that Americans, just by their birthright, are more entitled to certain freedoms, or they're more entitled to economic advantages than others. So you got to think about that. Why would you assume just because you were born American that you are privileged or you have right to certain things that other people in the world don't? We see it. Most recently we can look at Ukraine and look at the the anti-Semitism that's rising up again. And, we don't know who the group was behind it, but the pamphlets that went out saying that people had to go be registered. You had to go to, a local government office and register if you were Jewish. This is, again, the world does not show compassion to minority groups, to small groups, to people they see as less than whatever they themselves are. Next verse 15, talks about being just, and it says,
Do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. But in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor.
So as a holy people, we are to make judgments. If you remember, that was my last teaching 3 weeks ago about, there is a right way and a wrong way to judge, certainly, but that judgments are to be made. But the judgments, as we talked about last week, are to be based on righteousness. That is the pursuit that we should always be following when we do have to judge. We're looking by measuring according to God's Torah what actually is right, what is righteous. And so God's saying here, because it is righteousness that we're supposed to look at if we're to be a holy people, a person standing or their position should have no weight on that judgment. And this works both ways. God makes it clear this works both ways. Now, oftentimes, very obviously, we do see the advantages that those who have political power, those who have wealth and economic power, those who sit in privileged positions, that they're given many advantages and they exempt themselves from the law. They hold themselves to different standards. Think of our own Congress. They're not under the ACA, whether you think that's a good or bad law. They decided that it must not have been good enough for them, at least. And Congress exempts itself from numerous laws all the time. So that's just one example of how we see the world operates. Look at the celebrity trials that occur. Because of their wealth, because of their fame, they can afford better defenders. They get, and there's an advantage to that in the court system. So, but God says, judge righteously. Don't, just because of their privileged position, give them advantage. But at the same time, he says, neither should you give advantage just because they're poor. And there are judges that act this way. They take into consideration in their decisions, they are in a disadvantaged life. They've had a harder life. There's been negative things that have occurred in their lives, and this goes into weighing it. God says, no. Look at what my instructions require. And yes, there are times when mercy should certainly be shown, but it shouldn't be because of the standing of the person. God will show mercy because of the standing of and the status of your heart, but not simply the standing of the person. Next verses, 16 through 18, talk about loving your neighbor.
Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not hate thy neighbor in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor, and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord.
So here we see the origin of the second great commandment that Yeshua spoke. What Yeshua said was the second greatest commandment. We see it here in Torah that you are to love your neighbor as yourself. And in this we see what this commandment actually entails. How does one go out about loving your neighbor as yourself? Well, it says here in the surrounding verses, we're not to defame or speak against our neighbor, and we're not to do it either through gossip nor by testifying falsely against our neighbors. And probably the gossip one, the commandment not to gossip, that's probably the least followed commandment out there. And unfortunately, not just in the world, but among Christians and followers of Yeshua as well. And it's really easy when you look at the world to see how gossip reigns within it. There's an entire industry that exists, and millions of dollars are made off of celebrity gossip. Think of your TMZ and your Access Hollywoods, People magazines, even the 24-hour news networks. Watch CNN or Fox News. A lot of it is just gossip, celebrity gossip, political gossip at times as well. We also see, though, part of loving your neighbor is you are to rebuke your neighbor when they have sinned. This is love. If you see your neighbors in sin, again, as Yeshua teaches, pull them aside. Don't do it privately, not publicly. If they don't listen, then bring some elders into it. There's a way of doing it, but you actually are supposed to do this to help not just yourself be holy, but to help your neighbor remain holy as well. And it's a very sad and almost in an ironic way that this is perhaps the most misunderstood commandment of the Torah in today's modern world. For the world certainly has tried to seize upon the teaching of love your neighbor. But what they take it to mean is that you simply accept everyone for who they are, where they're at. And that means you accept their sins as well. That you don't have an expectation that they're to change, that they're to turn from the sin. There's a lack of understanding that divine love requires rebuke, requires that fatherly love. And again, why is this love? Why is it love to actually rebuke someone who's sinning? It's so that they would avoid their sins and that they would seek the forgiveness and the atonement, that they would seek teshuvah to return to God so that they would remain holy as well. Next verse 19, talks about avoiding mixing.
Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee.
Now in ancient times, and the reason this commandment was given is because pagans often saw the mixing of species as a means of accessing the powers, or magical powers, mystic powers of those species. Likewise, pagan priests often would wear garments mixed with both linen and wool because there was a belief that the mixing of linen and wools together would engender some type of power to them. This is to be a physical reminder then for the people of Israel that if they're to be holy and they're to be separate, there shouldn't be this mixing of the common and the uncommon. Being that you have been made separate, don't mix back together with it. It's a physical representation, reminder of that. Light and darkness have nothing to do with each other. And even today, think about the genetic engineering that is occurring in the world. And, man, a lot of, man, and the scientists say, well, this is so great because we can genetically engineer foods that are maybe more nutritious, or the tomatoes don't ripen so it's easier to transport food, things like that. But this is man's arrogance claiming that we're improving upon the natural order of God. Next, God deals with fornication, verses 20 through 22.
And whosoever lieth carnally with a woman that is a bondmaid, betrothed to an husband, and not at all redeemed, nor freedom given to her, she shall be scourged. They shall not be put to death, because she was not free. And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, even a ram for a trespass offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he hath done, and the sin which hath been done shall be forgiven him.
And then also, go ahead.
And when ye shall come into the land, and shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then ye shall count the fruit thereof as uncircumcised. 3 years shall it be as uncircumcised unto you.
Actually, yeah, that's going,
Sorry.
Yeah, just to 22. And then verse 29.
Do not prostitute thy daughter, to cause her to be a whore, lest the land fall into whoredom, and the land become full of wickedness.
So in these commandments here, what do we see? We see, and actually them, and also if you actually go back to chapter earlier to Leviticus 18, we see that God expects his people to restrict sexual activities to the bounds of marriage. And obviously looking out in the world, we see how the world rejects this. Especially in terms of if anyone, today, if you believe this, that these types of activities should be just restricted to marriage, well, you're uncool. You're not fashionable. You're a stick in the mud. Everybody does it. Why would you want? Why are you trying to deny the pleasures of his two consenting adults and no one is harmed from the actions? We also see in these verses, though, specifically verses 20 through 22. Now, when we read about this, about the man who sleeps with a slave woman. In here, we may begin to think, well, on the surface, this appears still kind of cruel and unfair by today's standards, but we actually said that there's great mercy is being exercised here by God. Rather than the man and the woman being killed for their trespass, both their trespass against God for sinning against his commandments, but also the trespass against the slave owner, because if you're a man and you sleep with the female slave, essentially you have stolen from that owner is the way it's being looked at. God is showing great mercy here in that he does provide an opportunity for atonement to be provided. And so what's important about that is that despite our call to this path of holiness, and we're looking at all these steps to holiness and how God desires this obedience in our walking out of his holiness, we must remember that he still does provide mercy as well to those that he calls out, that those who may stumble in their holiness, mercy is still extended to them. Next now, verses 23 through 25 we read.
And when ye shall come into the land, and shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then ye shall count the fruit thereof as uncircumcised. 3 years shall it be uncircumcised unto you, it shall not be eaten of. But in the 4th year all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise the Lord withal. And in the 5th year shall ye eat of the fruit thereof, that it may yield unto you the increase thereof. I am the Lord your God.
Now this commandment here pertains specifically to Eretz Israel, so the land of Israel. It's not something that is applied outside of it. But it still teaches us important things about being holy. First of all, it shows us that God has his own timings. That just because they went into the land, if they were to plant a tree, they couldn't automatically just start reaping from the benefit of it. They had to wait 3 years before you could even harvest from the tree. So God has established his own timings that we're to follow after. Secondly, it shows us that God's portion is first. Because in the 4th year you could harvest it, but the entire 4th year went to God. That entire harvest was to be given to God. So we see here God's portion comes first. It's not till the 5th year of after planting a tree that you can actually begin to take it for yourself. Also, in speaking of the fruit being uncircumcised, if we have a spiritual understanding of this, we see that God only accepts those that are circumcised. For us, those circumcised in the heart. Because again, the first 3 years, when you're not to take from the trees, it's to be considered uncircumcised. So you don't partake of it, God doesn't partake of it. 4th year, when it finally does, the tree becomes considered circumcised, then God accepts it, and then after God gets his first portion, we can accept it. We can then begin to take of it as well. Next verses deal with pagan practices and magic. So verses 26 through 28 read.
Ye shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall ye use enchantment, nor observe times. Ye shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shalt thou mar the corners of thy beard. Ye shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord.
And then verse 31 says,
Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after the wizards, to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God.
So much like the commandments against idol worship, these commandments are to keep God's people separate from the pagan worship and the demonic influences around them. Each of these practices that we hear listed here are associated with pagan rituals at the time of Torah, but they can be seen again today. If you go to the neo-pagan, the satanic, and the Gaia worshiping cults, Gaia being nature worshiping cults, we see in these same practices things like shaving your head in a certain way, the tattoos, the cuttings, and the markings that you're placing on yourself. The command not to eat blood from an animal. In ancient times, it was seen that if you ate the blood of an animal, you would inherit the strength of that animal. So for example, in warriors who were going to go out to battle the next day, they would eat, maybe they wanted to be fierce in the battle that next day, or strong, they would eat a bull. Or if they wanted to be swift, they would eat an antelope or something like that the night before, and they would drink its blood, believing that would then make them swift or powerful in the battle the next day. Relying upon these things rather than, as the Israelites would, always rely upon God for their strength in battle. Again, going back to the cutting of the hair, the shaving of heads, this was done in the pagan cults at that time, especially by priests who were specifically would worship and serve in the temples of cults around the sun and the moon. They would shave their head bald in order to represent the round, spherical bodies of the moon and the sun that were in the skies. Again, tattooing, cutting yourself, that was to show your allegiance to a false god. And then it also says here you're not to seek after divinations and spirits. You're not to enter into satanic or demonic worship. And then some of these things, people say, well, these are just innocent things today. Kids playing with a Ouija board or kids dressing up as demons on Halloween. The world tries to pass it off as just play. It's just having fun. But we don't recognize the spirits that we are actually invoking, inviting into our lives when we do this. And so God gives these commandments to protect us, to separate us from the world. Verse 30 talks about honoring the holy.
Ye shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord.
So God has his appointed times. God has his appointed places. And these appointed times and places have been made holy. They've been made uncommon. They've been made separate from the rest of the world. How have they been made holy? Because that's where he shows up. It's his presence that makes them holy. There's nothing special about any physical location or day on the calendar. It's simply that this is when God shows up. And therefore, God's holy people have been commanded by him to show up at those times and at those places in order to be in his presence. We're to come together, as was mentioned earlier, as the Mikra Kodesh, the holy convocation, an assembly of people who have been set apart. And we all know how the world likes to follow its own calendars. We just got through Easter, and we all had to deal in our lives individually with family members, friends, and just the world in general, those who wanted to follow after Easter and this calendar that was established by Constantine and the Romans, rather than the God's appointed times. Real quickly, verse 32 goes back to what we've already talked about, respecting elders.
Thou shalt rise up before the gray head, and honor the face of the old man, and fear thy God. I am the Lord.
Like I said, as a culture, unfortunately, what do we do to our elders? We often want to push them aside. We want to put them in the corner. We want to put them in the nursing home. I don't want to be burdened. I don't want to be stressed by them, rather than seeing them actually as a source of wisdom, of having lived experiences that we could all benefit learning from. Instead, what do? We gravitate again to the youth. We gravitate to the new. We should always remember, Abraham was 75 when he was called out. Moshe was 80 when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. God often would deal with, Yeshua was relatively young in his ministry at the age of 30, and there's importance to that age, why it was around that time. But, God often waits until much older, the men are much older before he actually calls them into his ministry, and they do their greatest things. Finally, we come to verses 33 and 34, which says,
And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you. And thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
So today we understand this as being welcoming to all who would come to discipleship under Yeshua. In ancient times, the commandment's very direct there, that those who would live among the Israelites, they were not to be treated as separate. One law for both the native born and the stranger among them. But, today we see this, that all are welcome to come under the discipleship of Yeshua. Regardless of our background, by race, ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic background, we are to welcome all, and we are to hope that all would teshuvah, would all turn from sin and seek atonement through Yeshua's sacrifice. Because our holiness and righteousness is not earned. It's not earned by genealogy. It's not earned by any merits of our own actions. But like I've said, it's bestowed upon us through the grace of God, through the favor that God shows us. We should not hold to it too jealously in the sense that it's reserved simply for a select few. Rather, the blessings of God and Yeshua's atonement are for everyone who seeks to attach themselves to the people of God. And this is certainly different from the isms that we see out there in the world, whether it's racism, classism, genderism, whatever it might be, those systems of beliefs in the world that one group of people is superior to the others. But that's the easy one to see, the isms. But there's another ism that I don't think is clear as to see that in the world that also violates that, and that's the ism of multiculturalism, which says that everyone should remain as they are, that the differences between people are to be celebrated. And this is for all peoples, regardless of ethnicity, race, class, sex, and their former religion. And to a certain degree, again, that's true. But what makes us distinct from multiculturalism is that although we welcome everybody, regardless of background, again, you've been called out now. You're to have been remade. Those old identifications are to become secondary in your identity. Your first identity is a holy follower, a holy disciple of Yeshua and of God. And thus, in this one collection of commandments that we've gone through, I mean, I know time is starting to get long here, but just going through just this one chapter, we begin to see what it means to be a holy people onto a holy God. And again, although the steps on these paths are not the steps on this path are not listed extensively here, we see how it is through the lives that we live that we are to be separated from the world around us. We see how we are to become a peculiar people unto God. However, we should not be naive and think that such a life as an alien traveler in this world should be an easy one. Rather, we should expect that the world from which we have become separated, we should expect that they're going to respond probably negatively to living the life that we've been called to. And this is important to understand, for often the rejection of the followers of Yeshua by the world is cast in terms of what they believe. It's that, a Christian believes this way, and therefore the world's going to reject it. And that, the Christian beliefs are irrational in the modern world. Or the Christians are seen as being judgmental and filled with hate because Christians speak against certain lifestyles or activities and by calling them sin. And the world, comes against us because what we believe does divide us. And we do proclaim that there is one single absolute truth that's been given to us by God. And all of that's true. But when you really stop to think about it, what really should be dividing us and will divide us even more than just professing what we believe is actually going to be how we act, how we live out our lives on the path of holiness. After all, what truly causes others to respond the most violently? Is it the actions or is it the words? Is it what we say or is it what we actually do? What gets the greater negative reaction? Again, think of your own lives. What usually is going to upset someone more? Is it actually telling people they should stop gossiping? Or is it actually removing yourself from the middle of the discussion because people are gossiping? Well, what's going to cause the greater offense? It's actually you acting out and saying, I'm not going to be part of this, and you walk away from it. What's going to be more offensive, telling someone that they should honor the Sabbath, or actually turning down those invites to go shopping or to go play a round of golf on a Saturday morning? What's going to be more offensive to the people? It's going to be turning down those invites. It's going to be actually acting out your faith. Similarly, I'm reminded, in this, it's always the actions. I'm reminded of a story my dad told me growing up. And about the importance that he was trying to teach in standing for one's beliefs, and that, again, not just stating them, but actually living them out. He would often tell the story when he was in the National Guard, how it was common for all the other soldiers when they would get a leave from base for for a day or so, or for the weekend, it was very common for them to go out to the bars and go out to the strip clubs. My father refused to do this. And it wasn't the act of actually saying, no, I think that's wrong, that offended them. It was that when the time came, he would stay back on the base. He just wouldn't leave with them at all. He chose to disassociate himself completely. And he said one night they even threatened to beat him up and drag him to the strip clubs because, he's a young man around 20. It's time that he grow up and be a man according to the way the world thought. He didn't back down, though. He said, you'll have to take me unconscious then, because you'll have to beat me unconscious, which caused them then to back off of their threat. But the result was, he said the rest of his time there, he was completely ostracized. After that event, before just saying he thought it was wrong, they still tried to influence him in that. But after that event, then they ostracized him completely. He said after that night, he only had one friend in the Guard the rest of the time he served, and unfortunately, not unfortunately for the friendship, but why, it was actually an African-American young man who was also ostracized because of his race, and so because they were the two ostracized individuals, they ended up becoming friends. But we see it's the actions, it's living out these commandments, not just professing them, that really causes us to be separated. And it's the life that we live that's going to always cause the greatest offense to the nations. For when we actually act it out, we actually convict them greater than any words we could ever speak against them. Because we're actually walking on that path of holiness. We're taking the steps of holiness that God has shown them. And when we do that, what we're actually doing is we're holding up an image. Our lives are an image of that plumb line that God uses to measure the world, that plumb line of Torah and his righteous instruction. And when the people see that how crooked they are to that plumb line, when they see someone who is walking upright, then the anger in their heart grows, and they hate us. They reject what is holy. They reject that plumb line. And it's the fact that the God of all the nations is holy, and that he requires his creation to be holy through righteousness. That's what they're in rebellion against, and what makes them angry. It is because the nations reject his holiness and they reject him that those who have been separated by him are also going to be hated and rejected. Yeshua told us this is going to be the result of our discipleship. John 15:18-20 says,
If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also.
And notice what Yeshua says here. He doesn't say, because you have believed his sayings. Rather, it's that you have kept my sayings. And keeping the sayings means you actually carry them out. You actually live them in your lives. And the world, as Yeshua says, has already rejected the Father. They're rejecting him as the Son. Because again, remember, these words are spoken the night he would be betrayed and the night before he would be crucified. They'd already rejected him. And thus those who are going to live according to the commandments of the Father and of the Son, they're going to be rejected as well. Nevertheless, we should not despair that we are to be a foreign and hated people in this world. While persecution, both the violent and the soft kind, we're very fortunate in the United States we don't experience the violent kind. It typically is just the soft kind. But it is to be expected. We should come to learn, actually, because it is expected, we have to come to learn to actually rejoice in it. Because, again, the persecution we receive is actually a testimony that we belong to him. The response of the apostles in the book of Acts, in being shamed by the Sanhedrin for their testimony of Yeshua, what was their response? It was to rejoice. To rejoice that they were considered worthy enough to suffer for his name. And our rewards for discipleship, of which first and foremost is the relationship that we have with Adonai, is what should sustain us in the face of the persecution and the rejection that we're going to feel. And it is this promise, the promise of being a son and a daughter of a holy God, that should cause us to want to seek his holiness even more, to seek the path of holiness he has laid before us in order to walk separate from the world of sin and death so that we don't become influenced by it anymore. We should have died to sin and death through the death of Yeshua. We should have raised with Yeshua to a new life. And so in conclusion, let us reflect on the words of Paul in 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 7:1, which say,
Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God.
As typical for Paul, he gets very wordy in trying to explain the good news and explain our walk with God. But all of that instruction is valuable. The detail is helpful. But what is Paul saying there? He's saying, be holy because your God is holy. Amen. It's our duty to praise the master of all, to ascribe greatness to the author of creation. For he made us unlike the nations of the lands and has not placed us like the families of the earth. He has not made our portions like theirs and our lot like all their multitudes. And we bend the knee and bow and acknowledge our thanks before the King over kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. He stretches out heaven and establishes earth's foundation. The seat of his glory is in the heavens above, and the presence of his power is in the most exalted heights. He is our God, there is none other. True is our King, there is nothing beside him. As it is written in his Torah, and you shall know this day, and take to your heart that the Lord, he is God, in the heavens above, and on the earth below, there is none other.